This is Mike Cote. Welcome to the Break It Down Show.
Yeah, man. So it's everybody knows I'm on the road. I'm in San Francisco. I'm on the Presidio. It's wonderful here, but the Wi-Fi is a little bit up and down. So if I drop out, bear with me. We'll do our best to do our best here. But it's not really important about me. It's more important about Mike. Mike runs the rational policy. I'm going to call it the center. Is it a center? Is that fair to say? You have your own
Yeah, thereabouts.
SubStack.
It's one man crew over here
Yeah.
right now. So,
Hey, someone's got to be the center of the center. I have my own policy thing, and I'm like, how I don't even have time for it, right? Like I know it's supposed to happen, but the provisioning and the money and everything else, I don't want to get distracted by that right now. I do want to ask you about that at some point, but for right now, we were talking about policy, and one of the challenges of these policies is we're very critical in the immediate. Oh, policy X, terrible idea. Oh, policy X, greatest idea of all time. And then we don't look back 10 years later. We don't have, I always think about this, like the politicians and policy people. We don't have something like an ELO rating, like you would have in chess or any other kind of thing where you're making, these are very, very important things. These papers that we write, we have, I'll also be critical of us here in general in America. We have a lot of PhDs who are invested fully, their careers are fully invested, their survival financially, their family's well-being, in there being a war between Russia and the US. Like they just, and maybe you're one of these people. And if you are, I think you'll get what I'm talking about here is we are so desperate for some of these things to happen and so convincing and compelling because you have all these letters behind your name. You're from the Rand, it's, Hoover, whatever it's going to be. But we don't know if anybody knows fuck all about getting anything done right, because we don't at, a policy and decide. And so we were talking about like domestic policy and moving things around. I was thinking about people that love rail. You're like, hey, we have rights here, and you can say we should have more high-speed trains, but we already have a system. It's hard to make that system more efficient, and just adding trains is not going to work. And if you think the rest of the nation is like the Upper Northeast Corridor, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Different problems.
No,
What do we
not at
do
all.
about that? Can we do anything about that? What do we do?
I mean, I think you had to do federalism. I think that's kind of the whole point of the country in the first place was to have this unified polity, but with distributed power. And I mean, having grown up, I live in Colorado now, but I grew up in New York, New Jersey area. I went to college in Boston. Very familiar with the Acela corridor. Ridden the Amtrak many times.
Yeah,
it's not good.
Sure.
I've ridden trains in Europe too, but it's just it's slow. I remember I had to take a bus one time from Boston back to New York because there was flooding on the train tracks. And I didn't really think that was a thing until they canceled the train because of it. I mean, these are things that we've kind of figured out other ways around. It's kind of an all of the above, right? We have some trains in certain areas that make sense for it. We have airplanes, tons of airplane travel, which is great and very different than a lot of other places in the world. And everyone pretty much has personal automobiles, which is a huge deal. I mean, not only for the autonomy aspect of it, the individual liberty of being able to go where you would like to go. And depending on the kind of car you have, you don't even necessarily need roads to do that. That's something that's very American. But at the same time, it's also, maybe not efficient, but it's very effective in terms of people getting to where they need to go specifically. I feel like, with trains, you get from metro center to metro center. But there's very little off the beaten path sort of ability. And I think, when I've traveled to Europe, I've really enjoyed renting cars because you get to see different parts of countries that you wouldn't otherwise. If you go to England and you just take the train from London to Scotland to Edinburgh, that's one thing. You get there in like 8 hours or whatnot. Driving takes a little bit longer, but you can see a lot of different places you may not have stopped otherwise. And I think that's how you really experience a country, as a tourist at least. But even as someone who lives here, I mean, if I want to get to the grocery store, I'd much rather drive than take another mode of transit because, first of all, it's easier for when I'm purchasing, things like that. But also it's like, I'm getting to where I need to go. I don't need to like walk to a place, walk to another place, leave that. It's just overly complicated, and it works in certain places. I lived in Manhattan for 5 years. Works great there. You need trains.
Right.
But it doesn't really make sense for like Kansas City or Houston necessarily in certain places. You do buses, you do other things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's challenging with the train thing. And one of the things I love to do when I'm tormenting my train people is to say, well, thankfully the US has the most rail. We move the most things on rail. And rail is good at things. It's not good at people. And in small scale settings like in Manhattan, maybe even in New York City, but probably not all that effective in New York City. Cars are the most efficient way. And that gets them mad. But here's one of the problems, and unfortunately my example is so relevant right now. If you are a young woman and you go on light rail or any kind of public transit or bus, and if you feel unsafe one time, if the second you can avoid taking public transit, you're going to, and you're never going to go back. And if you feel helpless, if you feel trapped, if you feel ogled, any of those things,
Mhm.
you've got a right to say, I'm going to get a better job, buy me an old Ford Pinto, and I'm just going to drive everywhere.
Yeah.
And,
No, it gives you, I
and it,
mean, there's
yeah.
carjackings, but it's a whole different thing in terms of, you
Mhm.
have some ability to maybe protect yourself in a situation like that versus,
Right.
mass
Yeah.
transit, you really don't. Especially if you're like in between stations or things like that. It's very impersonal, I would say.
Right. It's tough to make it work. And then they always talk about efficiency, but they talk about efficiency in a very narrow slice. They don't talk at the scale of life. So
Mhm.
you're not going to go to Costco if you're taking the train. I mean, not like an actual Costco run where you buy $600 of stuff to provision your family for the next month and a half or whatever, right? You're just not doing that on a train. You're not doing that on a bus. And maybe that's a higher level problem. But the thing is you're not going to do that. You said an important thing too. Like Americans have automobiles, singular American automobiles, plural.
Mhm.
I've got a truck with four-wheel drive for when I go to Tahoe. I've got a motorcycle for when I want to scoot around town. I have a high speed, whatever. And we have vehicles.
Yep.
Might have a razor in the garage. And you don't have to be well moneyed to have all these things. There's all kinds
No.
of people that have multiple cars for multiple purposes.
Oh, totally. I mean, used cars, things like that, and even like you're saying, kind of like secondary means of transportation. People have like,
Sure.
say, you live in a rural area, you might have an ATV.
Yeah.
So you live in a community in Florida, you might have a golf cart.
Yeah.
Again, these are all different methods of transportation, and I think having that, you know, boundless potential of the automobile, and
Yeah.
just the ability to have as many as you need. Again, it can be ways to be cheaper. I mean, we used to
Yeah.
have cars that were a lot smaller that might have worked better for cities. I mean, a lot of efficiency standards and stuff like that, putting down from the federal government, changed the way a lot of car companies
Sure.
operated in the U.S.
Yeah.
I mean, there are still small cars in like Japan and in Europe and things. I mean, if you ever drive in Europe and you rent a car, you're like, oh, I'm going to get a car that can carry my luggage. They're all small. They don't have any big
Yeah.
cars.
Yeah.
The only people that have big cars are soccer stars, basically. So that's one of
Yeah.
those things you don't get, and it's more practical for them. And it's not necessarily more practical for everywhere in the U.S., but I mean, having smaller, more efficient cars might be more practical for places like Boston or New York or
Sure.
LA,
Sure.
places like that. I mean, again, these are different solutions for different areas, and I think allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom, so to speak, is a
Yeah.
great way and a very American way to solve problems that we have.
And when the trained people get crazy, they instantly rush to totalitarianism and the
Yeah.
stick, and they just like, "You will abide." And like, well,
Mhm.
hold on, you got unions that are against you all, like these things. And then the thing that always comes, this will bring us into the international world. Security is hard. If you have and I don't know if it's still true, but at one point in time, the Chicago Transit Authority had owned or leased more vehicles than it had rail cars because it just takes a system. It takes
Yeah.
things, right? And we struggle with this. Maybe that's not true anymore. I don't know. But when that train line, and there's been a train line shut down in Chicago, part of the L, for I think it's 20 years now, right? As they modify it. Maybe they'll never have to touch it for the next 100 years. But that whole branch is cut down. So anybody who wanted to take that train or did take, they don't take it, and they've adapted and they moved on to something else. And they're not
Yep.
going to go, oh, thank goodness that, some will, but you have to have the scale and the people so that it makes sense. Yes, you can
Mhm.
move a lot of people. It's fantastic, but I call it 1.5 dimensional travel. It is limited. If you say, "Hey, I want to make a left here," you can't, and
Yep.
then they'll show me a cross train. Yeah, but that's one dimensional. You're changing into a new, and you just go that one direction. Airplanes are great, but a train requires and a bus requires its own police force.
Mhm.
And you're not going to have an authority on every car. It's just not going to happen, or on every bus. And when I think about trains, I think, well, my national policy brain, if I wanted to target China, I'm going to derail a train going 350 miles an hour, and I'm going to cause a ruckus. And
Oh
that
yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. That shit ain't hard to do.
No, it's much, much easier to sabotage. I mean, we were doing those actions in World War II, World War One,
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
since explosives were around and rails were around.
Civil War. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I wrote a big paper in graduate school about the impact of railroads in World War One, and sabotage was huge. I mean,
Yeah.
especially because
Yeah.
that's how everything. Besides, I mean, they didn't really have automobiles to the same extent we do now.
Yep.
The U.S. had a lot of mechanized stuff, but most of the European powers did not. So you're using just millions and millions of horses and donkeys, mules, things like that. So when they were able to bring rails into the equation to move people, move material, artillery, shells, all that kind of stuff, that made the war possible. And so
Yeah.
all the powers were always trying to sabotage that stuff. And there's nothing new
Yeah.
under the sun with respect to that, right? So we
Right.
would 100% be in that same boat if we were to get in some sort of kinetic conflict. Just like we'd be cutting submarine cables.
Yeah.
Now they're much more important than they were back in World War One, but
Yep.
in World War One, that was super important. Britain basically controlled all the submarine cables. They were able to cut off German communications with certain other countries. We're able to monitor other ones, and that if we think about how the U.S. got into the war, the Zimmerman telegram that was intercepted by the British and forwarded to us because they tapped
I
the
don't know if
wires.
that's me. Yeah.
So
Right.
that's one of those things where, again, we've done all these things in the past. And we see all the time now
Hmm.
submarine cables getting cut, whether it's quote unquote accidentally or not. I don't really believe it's mostly accidentally, to be honest. Especially in the Baltic, Russia does that, China does that. Um, we don't really think about it as much, but the internet, we're all on Wi-Fi. It's powered by these cables that are physical things that are running across the entire world, connecting continents. They've been around for a very long time, but they're extraordinarily important now because everything is so focused on real-time communications on the internet, whether that's stock markets, whether that's international diplomacy, communications, all this sort of stuff is done that way. And we have things like Starlink that are changing that a bit, but we're heavily reliant on these sorts of undersea cables, and that's going to be something that's going to get sabotaged, just like it was 100 plus years ago. So it's one of those things. If we can diversify away from things that are single point of disruption, that's super beneficial, and kind of bring that back to rails. I think that's a big part of that too. It's a lot easier for people to get around from city to city. If people have cars, they can take the train. That's great, but having that redundancy and that ability to kind of change on the fly is pretty important.
Yeah. Yeah. You said a lot there, and you're right. And when I see a critical singular point attacked, whether it was that dam in Ukraine or the Nord Stream pipeline, there's only so many countries that can do that. And I start by looking at us, because blowing up a dam is not simple. It's just not. It looks simple in the movie, but there's a lot of people
Oh yeah.
carrying a lot of explosives to take out a dam, or
No,
to
if you're
dive
not
down and
doing it
take
from
out
an
a
airstrike or
pipeline.
whatnot, yeah, that's super. I mean, and then thinking of dams and single points of failure, you look at China, the Three Gorges Dam is incredibly important to their hydroelectric power.
Hmm.
I mean, also downstream of that, if you were to destroy that dam, that's tens and tens of millions of people that end up living in that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's very dangerous for China to have that sort of thing. I mean, again, you don't build necessarily with the thought that you're going to have these things destroyed in a war, but it never hurts to think about what could go wrong. Being a former auditor,
Yeah.
that was kind of one of our mantras, was looking up all these things, trying to think about everything that could go wrong and testing it, stress testing it. And, I don't think we
Yeah.
think about that a lot when we're thinking about things like internal transportation networks, but
Sure.
it's probably worth thinking about at least at some point in the planning process, even if it's not, the defining factor.
I had a PhD who her study was on the movement of food throughout the nation, and she identified certain things, just critical locks in the chain.
Mhm.
Like if you examine the whole system, and this is all, you can buy this data and you can see where all the food moves from, and you could target certain areas or certain interstates. And it's hard to blow up a road and make it like a bad thing, but if you
Mhm.
derail a car going 350 or a train going 350 miles an hour with a bunch of humans on it, boy, that'll get the nation's attention, and they will divert a lot of assets towards attempting to protect. And,
Yeah.
and I think that people don't understand about like the security aspect of this is let's say that I want to take out some country's train and I've been tasked by my nation or just by my own insanity. I don't have to be successful. I just have
Mhm.
to approach and prod. I'm just going to cut this chain fence here and see what happens.
Yeah.
And if nothing happens, then I do the next one I do. And 'cause anywhere in that network, I can create a
Mhm.
vulnerability and just poke it and make it a bruise and just poke that bruise, and create a lot of chaos. This is what terrorists, that's what they do. So I can attack a lock on the Mississippi River and just gum it up for a couple of days. And
Mhm.
that will draw attention. And then I can go somewhere totally, far away. I can go derail the surf liner here in California, and that will cause a lot of chaos, or even just blow up part of the cliff structure around the surf liner because
Yeah.
it's ridiculous to have a train line running right along the beach. That
Yeah.
every time there's an earthquake, every time there's a storm, like the train goes down. So I could just go do. There's a lot of things that you can do that are just pinpricks. But boy, oh boy, if you want to disrupt a place and get them
Yeah.
to cause a lot of chaos, it's
I
easy
mean,
to
and
do.
and that's basically what Al Qaeda did after 9/11. I mean, including 9/11, that was an attack on American transportation infrastructure too. Look at how much
Hmm.
we've changed how we fly
Yeah.
since then. And then if you
Yeah.
look at their attacks in Europe, you had bombings on a train in Madrid. You had bombings
Hmm.
on the London metro and buses. Um,
Hmm.
Not only are these large, high casualty targets, right? They are, like you said, a way of diverting, further resources and attention and effort into protecting things that
Totally.
are, honestly very hard to protect. So
Right.
that's one of those
Yeah.
things. Again, it's just those points of failure are something that our enemies certainly notice.
Yeah, the sarin gas attack in Japan, right? Like that only
Mhm.
has to
Yep.
be halfway successful because I would say that was largely a failure, but
Yeah.
it worked. And how many people never rode a train again, or like terrified, or it did what
Mhm.
its job was to do was to break down some of the structure there in Japan. Now you add in the complexity of the United States and its diversity, politically, culturally, everything, and all of a sudden you don't have like these solutions. Like, well, Finland does this. Like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they all get along.
Yeah, it's
They
it's
all
funny. I
agree
mean,
on
where
this.
American exceptionalism goes multiple different directions, right? It
Yeah,
just basically means that we're special, and it's hard to compare
yeah,
us to any nation, even other very
right.
large population countries, because they don't have our heterogeneity.
Yeah,
And even smaller countries in Europe that might be more heterogeneous again have very different histories, different cultures. It's just it's hard to make comparisons with the U.S. and that kind of people really want to, especially on domestic policy stuff. But that's hard to do. It's easier to do it with foreign policy things, but
mhm,
domestically, I mean, there's no one like us.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the foreign policy thing is interesting too, because we have the things that we want, but a lot of that is driven by our ideology. Again, this goes back to our PhDs that are desperate for a war between Russia, and I don't even know why we care that much about Russia. I mean, and we want a stable Russia, and this is Pete's mind. Who knows? I'm prepared to be wrong about all this, but it's a nuclear power. Its economy is not bigger than California's, and so why are we freaked out about these guys? Do we need to protect Azerbaijan? Okay, well then that's a policy decision. But we get obsessed about Russia, and then
Yeah.
we don't take time to know that region at all. So we don't know anything about the difference between Russians, Ukrainians, and the folks that are in between. It's like
Mhm.
going to the eastern part of Canada and trying to call out, who are the Canadians, who are the French, and who are the French Canadians, and it's
Yep.
just or going to Puerto Rico and finding the folks that are like, we want to be a state, we want to be the same, we want you to fuck off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go sort that out. You can't. Oh, well, then why are you fucking with Ukraine and Russia? I
Yeah.
just
I
don't.
mean, I
I
think
don't.
I think the key when it comes to Russia is staying within its own borders.
Yeah.
I think as long as they did that, I personally would be not pleased with Vladimir Putin's regime. I'd be against them. I think they're still a security threat generally. But if you're not acting on that and you're not actually invading your neighbors, I mean, they've done this since 2008 with Georgia. They've done it with Ukraine twice now. They certainly have split away region in Moldova.
Yep.
These are all things that they've been stoking since the end of the Cold War, essentially. Obviously, there's a little bit of an interregnum there with Yeltsin, but he
Right.
was too drunk to be effective, to be honest. And he was very effective when he needed to be in terms of bringing down the Soviet Union. But as a leader of Russia, he was not helpful, I think. And Putin obviously has picked up where long term Russian interests have left off, which is on expanding its sphere of influence regionally. So I don't blame any of the European nations, Poland, the Baltics, these countries that used to be under the Russian jackboot, and not only during the Soviet Union. The history goes back centuries with this. So it's
Sure.
one of those things where I don't blame them for wanting their own protection. Joining NATO, I think that's a good thing. NATO is a defensive alliance. So really what we're trying to do with NATO is, hey, leave us alone. And I think the best way to do that is to be as heavily armed as humanly possible and station people on your borders, basically say, hey, this is our line, don't cross it. And we did that a lot during the Cold War. That was borne a lot as a burden wise by the United States, which I don't think we have the capacity to do in the same way we did then. But the Europeans are starting to step up. I think that's good. I think we should, really incentivize that, especially in Eastern Europe. The Polish have a very large military. They're growing it very, very quickly. The Baltics
Hmm.
spend a ton of money per capita on military, especially in terms of aiding Ukraine. They've done a great job with that. These are the nations that are actually on the front line. People think about NATO, they say, oh, the eastern flank. It's the front. That is where we are postured against in Europe. And maybe there are ways to think about that differently in the future. Maybe the South is a bit different in terms of migration flows, things like that. But right now, clearly, Russia is dangerous to Europe. I think they're more dangerous to Europe than they are to us. So again, I think Europe should take the lead on this. I think we should be helping them, supporting them. I like the current setup where we're basically selling the Europeans arms to then give to Ukraine. I'm fine with that. I was okay with giving aid as well, but if this is a structure that makes more people more likely to be okay with it, I'm for that, because the arms are still getting to the right place, and if the Europeans are paying for it, that's fine. They have plenty of money to do that. So I think one of the reasons Russia is such a bugbear for a lot of people here in the U.S. is that they're very, very good at inflaming domestic tensions. They've been doing this for years, going back to the Soviet Union, obviously, but even in the Putin era, I mean, even before Trump came on the scene, across Europe and across the United States, Russia has funded various movements that were meant to destabilize us, make us make bad decisions. Like if you look at all the green parties in Europe, those all have Russian funding. And
Yeah.
they're the ones that convinced the European politicians to be, hey, we're going to cut off all of our nuclear power and build these pipelines from Russia just for now until we get all of our wind and solar. And look what that's done. That's
Yeah.
allowed Russia to do all this meddling in Europe and kind of have them by the balls in terms of being their energy supply. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot to change about that. I think the U.S. can help with that in terms of exporting. We're a major fossil fuel producer, so shipping out LNG over to Europe would be great. We should be pumping that out like it's nobody's business. I mean, Russia makes its money almost entirely on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So if we want to cut off their war machine, the best way to do that is to make it less profitable for them to sell what they need to sell.
Yeah.
We've done some of that with tariffs and all, but I think there are better policies.
That also touches our deeply flawed energy policy. The like here in California, just down the road is, they're going to close down a refinery. Maybe that changes, maybe not, but because we struggle with what's good enough in terms of environmental policy and energy policy and how they work together, and the way that California is structured with our this is this. I'm not saying politically, but progressively we are calcified and cannot do things because
Mhm.
everything has rights and action groups and everything else. And so if you can go to court for everything. And so to take down a dam, to build a dam, all these things are damn impossible because of all of the rights that everybody has and everything has. And so we'd rather protect rights and fight in battles in the court, which is a method of doing things, but it makes it hard to do things like to have a good energy policy because I'm gonna have a guy on a couple days, a guy who's been a fellow at the Hoover Institute, and he's super smart on energy policy. And you have these old court cases, these old legislation pieces that had an intention, and then you expand it, you expand it, you expand it, and
Mhm.
and we've seen this across the board where the administrative state grows outsized
Yeah.
of its original purpose. And so that takes our policies and it makes them complicated. They don't work well. I've got some friends that they're a client of mine too, but they run a nature conservancy. It's massive. It's down in Orange County. It's huge, huge. And they must have 25 to 30 partners across
Mhm.
governments, agencies, administrations, nonprofits that they have to manage. And a lot of times the governmental entities, they point on which ways
Yep.
they're allowed to go. So you have to every time these guys do this, someone has to deconflict that. And
Mhm.
that just retards the entire process
Yeah.
and so now I'm just talking about energy, environment, but these things all overlap. It's an Euler diagram where you have
Mhm.
all this convoluted stuff. So if you get zoomed in on a Venn, it's like, well, back out, and
Yeah.
oh my God, there's all these problems because we can't deconflict all this stuff.
Yeah, there's too much overregulation. I mean, and what you're saying about the rights is important. I mean, it's one of those things where individuals have rights, but now
Hmm.
groups have rights and
Hmm.
inanimate objects have
Frogs,
rights.
right?
Exactly. It's crazy. It's one of those things where you can. We had a court case recently in Colorado about. It's actually I think about my local zoo, which is a great zoo by the way, Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. Definitely, if you're in Colorado Springs, come out and check it out. It's awesome. Um, they were basically trying to say the elephants there had human rights and could sue and bring causes of action, etc. And I think it got thrown out. Maybe on a technicality, we'll probably bring it again. But the elephants here, I mean, they're not treated badly or anything like that. But it's one of those things where you can advocate for policies that you like. That hey, you want elephants to be treated better. You don't think they should be in zoos. You can advocate for that. That's totally fine. But the
Right,
expansion of our innate human rights to an elephant or to a marsh or to a group of people even um, that's not a person. Groups of people don't necessarily have those sorts of rights. They cannot be denied to a group systematically, but like as a
right,
group itself doesn't necessarily have a right unless they're like a sovereign polity like a state or in America a native tribe. That's something that's a little bit different. But just like a group of people who have the same interests don't necessarily have rights as a group to me. Um,
yeah,
and like you said, I think that slows everything down. We need to be building up tons of energy infrastructure, not only
oh boy,
because energy production and consumption is a sign of prosperity. It's historically, if you look at since basically the industrial era, if you look at the correlation between energy consumption slash production and basically national well-being or standard of living, it's basically a straight line. Those are intensely correlated. It's basically if you don't have that sort of energy, you can't build for the future. You can't grow your
right,
own consumption or standard of living. You can't live as comfortably. And I mean, look at the technologies of the future. High tech manufacturing needs tons of energy. AI, data centers, things like that. That's why you see, and I think this is an awesome trend. I hope there's more of it. Starting to bring these nuclear power plants back online. 3 Mile Island in New York, Diablo Canyon out in California.
hmm,
That's good. We should have never taken them offline in the first place. I mean, the idea that nuclear power is inherently unsafe has not really ever been true, and it certainly hasn't been true in decades. I mean, look at France; they have all these small modular nuclear reactors. Look at the U.S. Navy. The U.S.
yeah,
Navy has an almost entirely nuclear fleet of major
yeah,
ships, including
yeah,
submarines that can stay underwater for like almost a year. That
yeah,
stuff's crazy. I mean, we have the ability to do this well. We look at the meltdown at 3 Mile Island, which I don't really think killed anybody. Maybe I'm wrong about that. That was before my time, but it was something that freaked people out.
yeah,
You see Chernobyl, but that wasn't because nuclear power is unsafe. That's because the Soviet Union was unsafe.
yeah,
You look at Fukushima. That's because a nuclear plant got hit by a gigantic tsunami. I mean, I don't think a nuclear plant in Kansas or in Colorado or Texas is going to get hit by a Fukushima level um, earthquake slash tsunami event. So
yeah,
these are things that you don't necessarily need to worry about. And when it comes to
mhm,
waste, 95% of that stuff is recycled nowadays. And
yeah,
even the stuff that's not is not necessarily hazardous to humans if
yeah,
you store it properly. So it's like we're using all of these old arguments that are really not there anymore, and
true,
it's putting us behind. I mean, if you look like a place like China, they're building out tons of energy infrastructure. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, they're building solar and wind, which people love to focus on, but they're still building brand new coal plants,
that's
and
right,
and they're using all different kinds of energy. I'm not saying we should build new coal plants; we don't really need that, but we should use an energy mix to be able to get reliable, safe energy, and in times of disaster, redundancy. Because
yeah,
we can't just rely on one certain thing and then that goes belly up, and then where are we?
yeah, yeah, and I guess this brings us over to the Trump part of the conversation because he's thinking differently and acting differently. And the first thing to say is whether or not you like President Trump, the president gets to call the shots. That's just how this works.
Yeah,
That's our
when it comes to
system.
foreign
And
policy, absolutely.
Yeah, well, and in a lot of ways, like he's pushing the limits of it, but every president has pushed the limits
Yeah,
of what the president can do. I mean, ruling by EO is not any. I don't like that at all. But
yeah,
the legislature won't do their damn job. We could have solved abortion 50 years ago if
yeah,
the legislature would have passed something,
yep.
but they couldn't, and so we just kind of had this festering wound that
Mhm.
has not still hasn't healed up. And so I put that on the folks who want to stay in office over trying to solve these problems. So
Yeah,
the president's going to expand powers. And that's what they've done all the time. I mean, it's just no president's going to go in. I mean, President Pete would. I'd be like, I'm going to start cutting up EOs every day. You guys will figure out if you want those laws in the legislature.
yeah. We need
And
another
then
Calvin Coolidge, but I don't think he's
yeah,
coming back
yeah,
anytime soon.
yeah, right. And no one's elected me either. I've had too much fun in my life. But the thing about President Trump and how he's trying to deal with energy is to just get more capacity going. Our mining is we have all
Yeah,
the resources we need here, and then if not us, then who is? Because someone is going to pull copper out of the ground.
yeah,
Someone is going to pull energy out of the ground, and if it's somebody else, it's going to be dirtier. It's going to be more dangerous. It's going to pay
mhm,
less people. We have good rules here on that stuff, and we can improve that system. But instead, here in California, at least, we're making it so hard to be a good business partner that businesses are exiting the state. And
yeah,
I can be told all the time, "Oh, it's fine. We're in great shape." But I don't know that we believe that. And so
yeah,
maybe 20 years from now, I'll be like, thank goodness those gas companies left. And I don't know if people realize this, but all of the stuff we ship, including oil, pollutes way more than I ever will. Like my gas stove and me cooking at home is not the problem.
yeah,
And if you don't ever cook at home and you just do Uber Eats or whatever brand, whatever you want to use, you're not the problem. Like
mhm,
we just consume so much stuff, the amount of tonnage that we move on ships, and that's all. None of that's using nuclear. We could do
yeah.
that. Nuclear,
Totally.
like we could fix a lot by just saying every supply ship has to be nuclear powered.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
that's
that'd be awesome.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those
Yeah.
things. If you look back at the sci-fi of like the '60s and '50s, which is what I really grew up reading, kind of like the Asimov, the Heinlein stuff,
Yeah.
nuclear power is everywhere, and that's kind of what people thought was going to be the future. And
Mhm.
if you look at like even like the Jetsons or whatever, like what do you think they're using? Like
Yeah.
definitely nuclear power. They don't say it on the show, but it's pretty clear.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's one of those things. Like this is what the future was going to be like, and then
Mhm.
we let some nut job, green radicals in the '70s ruin all that for everyone. And it's
Yeah.
just again, if we're just from a purely geopolitical competition standpoint, if we have less energy ability to produce it, consume it, take that energy and turn it into useful things, whether that's civilian or military uses, um, we're going to fall behind. We're not
Mhm.
naturally going to be ahead of our competitors. China's rapidly approaching us in terms of overall economy size, which I'm not really too shocked by, given how they have way more people than we do. So that's kind of a disadvantage we have, if you want to call it that, in comparison to a place like China that is just dwarfing us population wise. So to
Right.
really continue being ahead of them, we need to continue innovating. We need to continue building out all these brand new technologies of the future. I know people oftentimes say, "Oh, our economy is worse than it was in the '70s or '80s. It's much less industrial," but that's not necessarily a problem if that's what the future is going to be. We are the best at the space industry, which is obviously going to be very important. High technology, social media, even right. Just the ability for people to communicate. There's so many problems with social media. Don't get me wrong, but the ability for people to communicate, to share ideas, to sell things, to present their ideas, to grow their careers, all of that being digitized and all that's brand new stuff, and that has improved a lot of efficiency in certain areas. And I think those are the kind of technologies that we need to keep on developing. It doesn't need to be necessarily the
Mm.
same one. I have no idea what the next social media is, but I don't think anyone in 2002 really saw what the next thing was going to be anyway, right? So it's one of
Right.
those things where we don't know what it's going to be, but we know that we're going to need a lot of energy to power that future and to give ourselves the best chance to come out ahead. And I think, that's still something we should want. Obviously, there's a lot of people in this country that are left and right either hate it from the founding or are just disappointed in the way it's gone and feel negative about it. We need to turn that around because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have enough negativity, enough nihilism in your society, you have lots of problems, and you can't really compete against your rivals when you don't believe in the country that you're trying to have win out.
Yeah. A lot in there. Let me just pull on that string a little bit. When so first off, let me just say this. So I'm a big believer in ground truth, and so one of the things that we may see happening when the UN gets together and starts discussing Palestine, and good on Palestine for creating this problem. I mean, they're they are tiny. They are punching above their weight to get this much backing. There are a lot of people that believe that the end of times is nigh
Mhm.
because once we recognize Palestine, that unlocks this, and the seals are starting to be broken. Um, in terms of policy, it's a real thing. There's real people and I'm not saying that that isn't true. Like in their world, it's 100% true. Like this is going to happen, and all this is was destined to happen. Does this does this matter in the policy world? Like that there's a lot of people that are saying, "Oh my God, here's the next sign." The river is drying up, and the trumpets, and all these other things I hear about all the time. And I'm not mocking any of this, right? But you've got a significant body of people that are desperate for the end of times because they want to go to their reward.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's less of an issue here, but I do think there's a lot of that sort of thing generally. I mean, if you look at like, for example, Iran, right? That's essentially what they're going for. If you look at like I think I wrote an article for this. I think it was for National Review about Iran's like millenarian theology, basically, and they're trying to bring about these end times because they want to bring in this Mahdi Messiah figure to essentially rule an Islamic imperium across the whole world, and they believe destroying Israel is going to do that. And for them, the establishment of a Palestinian state is a step on that process. I think obviously they would much rather have the eradication of the Jewish state. I think that's their goal. I think that's the goal of a lot of the explicitly Islamic regimes that are siding with this sort of thing. I think you do have some places like you look at the UAE, Saudi Arabia. These are countries that aren't necessarily in love with the Palestinian cause. I think they just have promulgated it so much to their populace that they would be unable to do anything if they didn't kind of say they support it. That's turning a little bit. I mean, you're getting some more of the geopolitics involved, where
Yeah.
Israel's kind of kicking ass across the Middle East, and people like being friends with the big dog on campus.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's Israel right now. I mean,
Yeah.
Turkey's angling for that spot too, but clearly Iran has kind of gotten slapped down over the past few months, which is great. I love that, um, and I think that's good for Israel in the long run. Right
Yeah.
now, they're losing the PR war. That's something that comes up all the time, where there are bad videos coming out of Gaza. Obviously, all these European countries are trying to recognize Palestine as a state. Here in the U.S., by the way, which I don't think we should even have the UN here anymore, but having something like this happen on our soil is kind of farcical to me. Um, it's one of those things where they're losing this battle, right? They're losing the PR war. I think part of that was baked in the cake. I mean, if you looked at October 2023, um, I come back to this. I was talking to my wife about this earlier. It's kind of crazy to me. I wrote an article for National Review. I think it was one of my first ones over there in late October 2023, saying that Israel was not committing genocide in Gaza. The
Right.
fact that it was already a talking point before they even identified all the bodies of the people from October 7th is showing that there was really no deep reservoir of sympathy for Israel. There
Yeah.
were people who are anti-Israel who were just waiting to turn on a dime, and for the first opportunity they had to do that. You did have some people that were actually actively celebrating the massacre there while it did happen, which is crazy, but that wasn't like the norm. But within a few weeks, you had all these narratives already. I think Israel kind of had some of that loss baked in the cake. I do think they've lost some otherwise persuadable people simply by not engaging, especially in English language media, in the way that they should. I mean, there's a lot of people online that are debunking things, or you have articles now in the free press, places like that are looking at a lot of these claims and saying, "Hey, this is misleading. This photo is misleading. Um, this is happening. These claims by the Hamas health ministry is bullshit." The
Yeah.
people are doing that.
Again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we think we would have learned
Yeah.
this over the past like 30 years, but um, this is happening, and people are doing that, but they're not the official government of Israel,
When
and
you
they're not engaged
say,
like they should.
I want to jump in because I don't want to get past this point. When you say the free press, you are not talking about the Guardian. You're not talking about the Washington Post. You're not talking about the New York Times because these folks have willingly and repeatedly cited a terrorist organization's Ministry of Health. I'm doing
Yeah.
quotes because they're not an actual government. So when they have been bamboozled, if that's being nice,
Yeah, very
over and over again
willingly.
by the same. Yeah, right. And so when that's not free press, that is a purchased press. Somebody is doing something to create influence where these storied franchises are willing to piss away their integrity. We have a problem with our media, and we have a distrust of the media because of stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
when the inevitable retraction comes, sometimes the entire story pulled down,
Mhm.
that doesn't have the same, never will have the same weight, right?
No.
We all know the Churchill quote and all that stuff, but this has happened again and again and again and again,
Mhm.
where they have lied about this. This was part of the design of their structure, and there are people that are absolutely unwilling or incapable of accepting that reality.
Yeah, and it's one of those things again, when this happens over and over and over again, you kinda see it's like that "fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on
Hmm.
me." Yeah, they've been fooled like 15 times now.
Yeah, yeah,
It's buying into it deliberately. I mean,
yeah.
if
That's a
you look at
partnership.
all of these that have been retracted over and over again throughout this entire war, it's been almost
Hmm.
2 years now. Um, they had a hospital bombing that wasn't by Israel, number one, didn't kill nearly
Hmm.
as many people, number two,
Right.
and was shot by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. You have a lot of these things going on when it comes to people saying, "Well, oh, there were no rapes on October 7th." It's nonsense. It's
Yeah.
buying into extremely small, misplaced quotes that are pulled out of
Hmm.
this, and
Hmm.
it just doesn't actually make any sense. They're
Right.
doing this deliberately. This is not something that is accidental. If you look
Hmm.
at a lot of these journalistic organizations do have partnerships in the Middle East, especially with Qatar, which is a major funder of Hamas. People think that they're a neutral country or an American friend that's just mediating in this dispute. That's garbage.
Right.
They host a major American air base there, but they built that explicitly so they could play both sides, and
Yeah.
they've been doing that for decades now. This is nothing new, but they've gotten their tentacles into media. Obviously, Al Jazeera is a state-funded operation there, and they push a bunch of progressive politics here in the U.S. But if you look at any of the translations of their Arabic language media, it's a
Hmm.
whole different ballgame.
It is.
It's
Yeah.
a different audience. That's the one that they're actually trying to speak to. You
Yeah.
get a LGBT pride here in the U.S., but you go over there and it's stone them. It's a whole different ballgame, and it's one of those things where you'd think if people were interested in actually understanding this, they'd look into that. Um, but they're influencing a lot of this stuff. They have campuses all across the country have bought into Qatar, and they've done that by taking huge donations. They established campuses over there. I mean, the only reason to establish those campuses over there is not to like educate the Qataris. There's like 200,000 Qataris, and everyone else in the country is a indentured servant. If I'm putting it mildly, um, this is to purely establish an influence network, and we've been really kind of wary with that with China. I'm not very happy with the way Trump administration's dealt with that so far. They
Hmm.
did a great job the first time around. I think this time has been a bit different, especially when it comes to maybe bringing in 600,000 new Chinese students on visas. But we've been cognizant of those networks. We helped shut down some of the Confucius institutes on campus. But they're doing the same thing. And if anything, Islamist terrorism is something that we've been very much conditioned to see as a threat, and that's correct. It is a threat, but China is a bit more of a explanation for a lot of people. But it
Hmm.
should be very, very easy, very low hanging fruit to say, hey, this organization, this country over the campuses, and the reason they're doing so is to whitewash their support for killing and kidnapping Americans. We forget that on
Yeah.
October 7th, a bunch of Americans were killed and kidnapped.
That's
Um,
right.
that was an attack on us just as much as it was an attack on Israel.
Yeah. Yeah. And that complicates things, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Just these things are never straightforward. There's always more to it. Like when we abandoned Afghanistan and we left our allies in the lurch, like all the
yeah,
French Afghans that we just
yeah,
stranded there because of the way we pulled, like we own that. Like that's part of that damages our international credibility. When I
oh yeah,
think about the the collection side of foreign policy and how we build good collectors, and we have some pretty dang good intel. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I would say at the ground level, I see a lot of talent just walk away, and we're not good at harvesting that talent and trying to put people in places where we could learn more about, Ukraine and Russia and Ukrainian
Mhm.
Russians and Russian Ukrainians, we seem to be unwilling to invest in the human side of that. We want robots to do these
Yeah.
things. And here's the thing I learned about robots is they don't have the detail and the nuance that humans
Mhm.
do. Whether you're talking about baseball, like Philip talked about, like, hey, here's a big number. Like, well, that's a big number. What does that number mean? Let's look into it. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, it doesn't say what you want it to say. These kind of things. I'm using baseball as an example, but when we look at the collection efforts that we do, and I'm going to bring this back to Israel now. The other day we were talking before the Qatari bomb went off, or the Israeli bomb went off in Qatar. It's always been known that Israel's going to go anywhere around the world to attack its people that are attacking it. And if you don't attack
Yeah.
them, they don't, they're very tolerant of those things. But from the second that October 7th happened, I've been saying, be prepared. They're going to go
Mhm.
like, oh, there's bad people in Qatar. And I'm like, today.
Yeah.
And if they push their hand too far, they won't be around. And so just the other day, and I saw it, and look, this is just me getting one thing right. Maybe I was wrong about this. Maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought it was. But when the Israelis were like talking about the negotiations, and they said nobody's got a rabbit in their hat, and I'm like, I know someone has got a rabbit in their hat, and it's going to be the Mossad. And the next thing you
Yep.
know, kablammy, they blow up the Qataris. Not a surprise,
Yep.
absolutely sure. And here's one thing about the Israelis with their success of their the crazy intel operations that they've had. This is me speaking like an expert right now. Every nation is now looking like, where are the Israelis? Where are they? I
Mhm.
mean, the amount of Iranians killed since that attack went down is crazy. They've shown so much distrust and discontent and murder because
Yep.
of their effects. It's shocking, and every country needs to be going, how far embedded is Mossad into our country? And I don't know if that's good or bad for Israeli foreign policy to have everybody wondering where the Jews are in their organization.
Yeah, I think it does stoke some potential danger there for them. I think it's a much bigger issue for the Arab states or Islamic states generally. I mean, but again, like you're saying, this is nothing new. They went to Argentina to get Eichmann in the 50s. They had basically a spy become the deputy defense minister of Syria during wars with Syria. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's just one of those unheard of
Hmm.
intelligence coups. I mean, we hear all about the Soviet spies, Kim Philby, all those folks. Obviously, did a ton and ton of damage, but
Sure.
none of them were ever they didn't get to that point in the defense hierarchy of the United Kingdom or the U.S.
Right. Yeah.
You had sympathizers, which is its own separate problem. Don't get me wrong, but a full-on spy mole sort of guy is that's wild.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at what happened after the Munich massacre at the
Oh boy.
Olympics. They made a movie about that because it was so badass, basically going around the world taking out every single one of these people that did this.
They
And
took
this is
out an
again,
ad in a paper and put an obit in for like Mike Cote was blown up today.
yeah,
But Mike Cote wasn't dead. That was his message. Be like, good night, motherfucker. And then
yeah.
they went and smoked him. So
Oh,
yeah,
it's
like
crazy.
it's icy, icy cold.
Yeah, no, and they're excellent at this. I mean, that's one of those
Yeah.
things where they're probably the best intelligence agency in the world at human intelligence and human
Right.
ability to carry out covert operations, things like that. And
Yeah.
we've lost that, like you were saying. I mean, we had our entire CIA network in China rolled up. I think that was during the Obama administration.
That's right.
Um, that was disastrous for us, and
Yep.
we've since then heavily relied on signals intelligence, which is great. We're very, very, very good at that.
Yeah.
But there are places that you can't get that. North Korea, Afghanistan. You don't get the same level of penetration as you would if you had either on the ground cultivated sources or putting in
Right.
your own people. And I think when it comes back to Israel, it's one of those things that of October 7th, they didn't listen to the people. The people that were watching were saying, as this is building up, hey, something's going on here. But
Hmm.
they were relying on these high tech security solutions that ended up failing or being
Yeah.
able to be disrupted. And that obviously was catastrophic for them. I think they've
Yeah.
learned their lesson with some of that. I think they're going to change that.
Can I
But
can
I
I jump
mean,
in here though?
yeah,
This is an important thing because we always like intelligence failure, right? But we're all salesmen, and so we're like, oh, I see what's coming. I predict that Qatar is going to in the Houthis, and someone's saying that every single day. Like we see threat around every corner, and so when there is some reverberation and the noise in the echo chamber that
mhm,
confuses people and makes us go, like I used to call it the wheel of threat, and they have like a monkey at the Afal Palace in Baghdad, and the monkey spins the wheel of threat, and it's like VIBDE on Wednesday because
mhm,
and you go to the next trade, like, it's Christmas.
Yeah.
It's like these things go together, like they shake the dice, and then they
Yep.
come up with this answer. So we love threat. We love to predict it and everything else, and that causes. Look, I don't know what you do about this, but we believe stuff, and sometimes we believe the wrong things because, and it's a question you have to always ask yourself if you're an operator on the ground: is who's running who? Am I the agent or am I the op? And you shouldn't always have a good idea because that means you're the op. So
Mhm.
we're always on the edge of this thing. So when we talk about intelligence failures, yes, it's an intelligence failure, but was it inevitable? Yes. And so, can you build a system that will listen to itself? Like one of my former commanders, Eric Kleinsmith, he was part of an organization that was ahead technologically of the law, and they found the 9/11 cells. They discovered them, but because of the laws against data mining and holding American information in an intel thing, you can do it, but like it's temporary. And so they were told, like in court or by commanders, like you have to dump all that stuff. And so they took
Mhm.
all that stuff, and I'm dumping like files, but
Yeah.
they deleted everything. They had to. They might have made an ill-principled choice and said, we're going to disobey this lawful order and break the
Mhm.
law because this is going to prevent something, but that makes them pirates.
Yeah.
And intel people, those kind of intel people aren't typically pirates. And so they do what they're
Mhm.
told. And so was that an intel failure or was that an organizational failure?
Yeah.
And I don't know. But I think it's less of an intel. The intel was there. We
Yeah.
just weren't able to hear it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, it's people. It's if you don't have any familiarity with this, or you've never read like raw intelligence dispatches or things like that. I've read a lot of this in terms of historical stuff. If you go back and you get dispatches from the British Empire, someone sending something back from Central Asia or whatever, saying what the situation is on the ground.
Yeah.
Um, it's not necessarily analyzed yet, and especially when you go to signals intelligence, that's just raw data. I mean,
Yeah.
you have no idea. I was recently writing a bit about like the atomic bombings of Japan, and if you look at we broke Japanese codes very early on, both
Right.
military and diplomatic. And so you hear people talking back and forth to one another. They're saying things, but you don't know what that means in context.
Yeah.
This is just
Yeah.
data.
Are you
Without
the
the
op?
context, it's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's what is this?
Yeah.
And I think when people, just lay people hear, oh, the intelligence on for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Um, yeah, there were conversations that we had the access to in Iraq where people
Mhm.
were talking as though they had weapons of mass destruction program, because a lot of them believed that they had a weapons of mass destruction program. Saddam Hussein lied about that for decades,
Yeah. They
because I
acted
mean,
like it. Yeah.
yeah, he wanted people to believe that, and
Yeah.
he did obviously use chemical weapons in the past. He had scuds with chemical weapons that he was planning to launch at Israel.
Right.
I mean, if you look, he had a nuclear reactor to build nuclear weapons that Israel destroyed.
Yes.
So it's one of those things. There's a lot of information building in a certain way, but it's not exactly something that is like cut and dried. Oh, here's what the answer is. It's
Yeah.
all human interpretation.
Yeah.
And when we rely too much on us abstracted from the situation on the ground, it's harder to gain that context, that nuance, that understanding of what's going on. Besides just like, here's the raw information. Here's a conversation out of context. What do you make of it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point, man. The just going back again, because I jumped in on you and said, who's the op again, right? Like, so just because you intercept something doesn't mean that you're not being deceived on
Mhm.
purpose, and so all these things require checking and double checking. Personalities, people don't get along. And again, like I went to go do a contract gig for the government one time, and we were doing surveillance. That's about all I can say about it. But the pre-brief before the event that was going to be in Colorado was about Islamic terrorism, and we were not going to be watching Islamists. like, okay, we're going to go do this thing that's classified, and we're not looking at people from the Arab world. So why is this part of it? But that's what he sold that day, and so I'm
Yep.
like, this is irrelevant to what we're doing. And what if he would have been right? I would have dismissed him right from the jump.
Mhm.
Like it's a very complicated world, and folks lose sight of that. So we can have all the intercept we want, we can have all the sources we want, but that also, look, it creates a thing that we call Berlinery. It's like, wait, who are
Mhm.
you watching, and who am I watching, and who's watching us, and who's watching that person? Am I watching that person? And y'all, it's like this crazy
Oh
mix
yeah.
of people, and it's called Berlinery because Berlin had that. They had every
Mhm.
nation was spying on everybody, to include Americans spying on Americans. I mean, this is it's the intel world is a complex world to get things right reliably, and shockingly, the law enforcement side of it often finds things out ahead of time, and that's an
Mhm.
amazing thing.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, it's one of those things where there's a lot of successes. I mean,
Mhm.
if you look at what we did, I don't think we handled this properly because, again, going back to the intel, right? You can have that raw data, you can
Yeah,
interpret it correctly, but
right.
if the policy decisions don't act on it in the best way possible, then you can still fail, right? If we
Yeah,
look at what
yeah,
happened in the build up to the invasion of Ukraine in 2022,
sure.
clearly we had a lot of intelligence that this was going to happen. There was
Hmm.
open source stuff, but we obviously had a lot of stuff clandestine behind the scenes that we knew about. And the Biden administration chose to basically say, "Hey, we know you're going to do this. Don't do it." And that was not the right approach, clearly, because it didn't work.
Yeah,
But it doesn't
yeah,
mean that the intelligence was wrong, because clearly it was. We knew it was going to happen. We just didn't intercede in the way that prevented it from happening. So you have so
yeah,
many layers of potential, I mean, quote unquote failure, I guess if you want to call it that, that it's hard to get it right. And the fact
right.
that we do get it right a decent amount of the time is pretty impressive.
It's pretty impressive. Yeah, and that's due to a lot of bumbling by the opposition because they
Oh
don't
yeah.
have, they don't have they have a higher level of you got to be better than that. Colonel John McKay, Marine, was in Cuba and was making real progress on state to state repair. And well, that wasn't the policy that the Clinton White House wanted. And so, even though he had the door open and was ready to have, the higher level folks come in, no thanks. Slammed the door.
Yeah.
so so who knows what would have happened, but that's the other thing, right? So that's the policy disagreeing with what's being offered. Like if, let's say I go out and I run an op and I've got this source and we can prevent an October 7th. Well, someone has to agree to that and say, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's what we want to have happen. And then we all stick our necks out because that's risky stuff too. It's like, no, again, like who's running the op and who's Pete and why the fuck is he opening the door for, so
Yeah.
it's neat to think about all these things, and then that makes you just think about Israel again. Like, oh my God, they convinced Hezbollah to buy walkie-talkies and
Yeah.
beepers.
Yeah. They set up whole
And
companies to do this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like they got someone got a purchase order and said, "This
Yeah.
is a good idea. I got this proof to the boss. Here's a purchase order. I'll take 5,000 of those. Great. They
That's
made money.
incredible. Yeah.
It
No,
was
just the ability for them to do all this. And it's something that we should learn from. I think we have gotten very much away from the
yeah,
covert ops side of it, like extra military, I guess. We have
yeah,
SEAL
yeah,
teams.
yeah.
Obviously, we took out Osama bin Laden. We do drone raids, drone strikes, things like that.
Right.
But we've gotten far away from like the really covert ops sort of stuff.
Hmm.
And I think we're coming to a world where that decision is going to be more and more difficult to justify in terms of practical reality,
Yeah,
because clearly our enemies are doing that. I mean, a lot of it's in the cyber world now. We have disruptions and things, but I mean, again, we could be doing plenty of stuff clandestinely that none of us know about right now, unless you're read
yeah,
in on it.
yeah,
But these other countries are clearly engaging in widespread cyber warfare against us. It
yeah.
is extremely commonplace. If you look at the number of hacks of medical organizations, if you look at ransomware stuff, if you
Oh
look
my
at,
God.
Iran
Everywhere.
attacked a dam, I think, during the Biden administration, a
Hmm.
small dam, like we were talking about earlier, right? That you're
Hmm.
poking and you're prodding, you're testing. They didn't do anything to it, but they had
Right.
access.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
look at even hacks of the government, right? Look at the
Yeah.
Sony Pictures hack. North Korea did that. Again, and they use criminal elements in this gray zone sort of way
Yeah.
to add this plausible deniability, make it hard for us to respond in a direct manner, which
Yeah.
maybe we shouldn't be doing. Again, I think we need to sort of. It doesn't mean you co-opt criminals necessarily, but
Right.
we have a lot of people who are very, very, very skilled programmers in the United States,
Sure.
and who are patriots, and would probably be very, very happy and willing to use those skills to help our country, especially when we're getting attacked, pretty much
Yeah.
constantly from without.
Yeah. We also have the same skill to find people like me that are able to infiltrate things and go out and
Mhm.
go on the ground and do it. But we like to. I was in the army 3 different ways, and no one ever thought to say, "Hey, people, why don't you stay?"
Mhm.
And I was very fortunate. Had a great career, great time, and did a lot of things. But I know so many people like me who are like, well, I wanted to do more, but nobody asked. Nobody let
Yeah.
me. It's like the leadership was awful. And if I had Tulsi Gabbard's ear for 2 minutes, that's what I'd say. It's like, let me help you develop. better ground assets, because if we don't, we're gonna get run over. And as much as we have a good kill capture capability, and we have
Mhm.
some collectors that work in that realm, we don't have what I would call real strategic collectors who are
Mhm.
just in the area, making a life
Yeah.
there and connecting and building a network and selling olive oil or whatever it's going to be. We don't have enough of that, and in this world,
Yeah.
we need more of it. What else do you want to cover? We've been at this for about an hour, almost exactly an hour. So, and thank you for coming on. I always
No, no
appreciate
problem. I
time.
enjoyed it.
Anything else stick in your mind that you want to get into?
I mean, we talked about the Palestine stuff, obviously. We briefly mentioned kind of that strike on Qatar. I
Yeah,
think that was a big deal. Like you said, I mean, it doesn't actually seem like it necessarily killed Hamas leadership. It did kill
no,
Hamas members, but I think that wasn't really the point. I think the biggest point there was saying, "Hey, you're not safe here. You
yeah,
can be in a ritzy hotel, but we're coming to get you too." And I think that's a big message to send. So I'm,
yeah,
I'm glad they did that. I think that's going to resonate as time goes on. But yeah, they're getting a lot of flack for it, and unfortunately, I think the U.S. is getting involved with being upset with Israel about this, and
hmm,
I think that's a strategic mistake on our part. It is not necessarily a purely Trump mistake. I mean, Biden labeled Qatar a major non-NATO ally just a few years back, so
yeah,
this is a bipartisan problem that we have over there,
yeah,
and it doesn't seem like we have enough people in Washington, whether it's in politics itself or the think tank world, that are clear-eyed about this and are willing to kind of step away from the Qatar lobby, which people talk about the Israel lobby all the time, but they spend a
sure,
lot less money than Qatar does, and we are much more naturally inclined as a society to be supportive of the Western-ish, liberal-ish
yeah,
democracy,
yeah,
Judeo-Christian democracy, basically in the Middle East, than we are an Islamist state that still has slavery. But one
yeah.
of those countries is also very powerful in Washington, and I'm afraid that we're not really kind of looking that directly as a problem. And I think overlooking these sorts of things is negative for us. I don't think we can really afford to miss any of these because a lot of our adversaries, whether they're pseudo adversaries like Qatar or hard adversaries like China, they're working together. They all have the same goal in mind, which is displacing us and changing the world order to something that fits them better.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
shouldn't want that. People are willing to be okay with that and say, hey, that's just how the world's going to be. I don't think we should accept that. And
yeah.
I hope that our government and policymakers kind of get the picture a little bit more. And hopefully, as time goes on, they do.
Yeah, I mean, this the folks who are saying that we're not a hegemon anymore. Well, this is you're seeing some of that with Israel saying, not so fast," and Russia saying, not so fast. They're
Mhm.
they're asserting themselves, and this is all. Everything's a contest. Everything's a competition,
Yeah.
and we're going to find out where all this stuff winds up. And you're right about Qatar. Like, what are we going to do? What is our relationship going to be? Do we need to pull back? Do we need to invest more? How do we look? Here's the bottom line with Qatar. Until they publicly change it, if you wanted to get into stoning tourism and go to places where people get stoned to death,
Yeah.
that is a place that allows that still. Do they do it? No, but is it on the books? Yeah. Why would that be on the
Mhm.
books still? And that seems like a policy thing. Like, why don't you guys take that off the books
Yeah.
and never do that again? Commit to that with us. Help us get rid of it worldwide. But we don't see that happening because it's not high priority. But that's who you're dealing with, is
Yeah.
folks that have that kind of level of Islamic root in what they do.
Yeah, and it's funny because you get a lot of people who are correct about Islamic fundamentalism and extremism in a lot of other respects, and they see that clearly. And then there's a blind spot here, and
Yeah.
you don't know the motives ever, but Qatar does spend a lot of money in the United States,
Sure.
especially in
Yeah.
media, especially in politics.
This is
So
great, man.
it's always, I mean, just everything. It's always worth watching out for what foreign nations are interested in certain outcomes and certain policies, and if they put their money where their mouth is, which increasingly they all seem to be doing.
Make sure you guys go to Substack and check out, or go to X and look up Mike. You'll find you guys know how to do all this stuff. So I'll just say it. But he's doing great things and constantly commenting and oftentimes in criticism of President Trump too. So there's a different point of view here, and I think something challenging. And Mike's always great about having a conversation. Sometimes I'll challenge him on X, and we may get into a deeper conversation. But there's some thinking going on, and it's quality work. So I appreciate you coming on. You
Yeah, I
want to say
appreciate you
anything in
having me.
closing before? Yeah, no, of course. You want to say anything in closing before we go?
Not really. I mean, again, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it and happy to do this anytime. And yeah, check me out online. Happy to engage and answer any questions and write quite a bit on my Substack. So check that out too.
All right. I'll see you all later on. I got a fantastic another show today, so you guys are all lucky. And I'll come back and say goodbye to you in a second, Mike.